Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds, a very educator-centered edition and scholarly edition. I guess we could say I have Dr. Alison Dover joining me for this episode. Dr. Dover, or may I call you Alison or Dr. Allison? What would you
Please call me
prefer?
Allison. That
Okay,
works.
all right. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Jason. Thank you for having me on here. It's always a treat to get to talk about the work and to amplify the students and teachers who have been a part of everything we do. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I had the pleasure of introducing you as a keynote speaker at the American Reading Forum conference a few years back. It was an online conference during the height of the pandemic. And I'm going to pull up the title of the book here, Radically Inclusive Teaching with Newcomer and Emergent Plurilingual Students, Braving Up. And so delighted to share about that work on this episode and your background as a teacher and other things.
sure. So, I guess I could tell you a little bit about me and then
Hmm.
jump in as we have questions. So, I
Sounds
am
great.
former high school English language arts teacher. I taught 10th and 11th grade ELA in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which is a predominantly Puerto Rican district in central Massachusetts. I also directed service learning for a network of small public high schools back in the day in Providence, Rhode Island. Before charter schools were a charter school movement, we were thinking about community schools and sort of what that looked like. And so, I've been in education for a long time, and really got into it because I think that young people have so much to say and we are
Mhm,
so good at
mhm,
silencing their voices.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have the opportunity to really engage in conversations and have hard conversations about the issues that are affecting our communities and the solutions that young people propose to them. So that's what brought me into this work.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I spent some time in academia, but I'm currently a high school English teacher working with 10th and 11th grade students. So really, really glad to connect in that way as well with your experiences and working with a fairly diverse range of students. So I appreciate your work a great deal, and it's part of where my passion is. So
Oh,
um,
that's great. I miss them. People often ask. So I've been in academia now for, oh gosh, I don't know, 10, 12, 14 years, something like that. And nobody sings to me anymore. There's so much I
yeah.
miss about working with high schoolers. People don't make me art in the same way. I don't have kids coming into my office to randomly poetry slam and raise up
Hmm.
those voices, right? And so part of why I do the work that I do in academia and why I'm in teacher education and did this book project is because I wanted to get to hang out with kids again and
Yeah,
to
yeah.
really get a sense of what they're thinking about. And so it's just been such an incredible learning experience for me. I'm here in Southern California now. I'm a professor at Cal State Fullerton down in Southern California. For folks that aren't familiar with it, I came here in 2016. I had been teaching in Chicago at Northeastern Illinois University out there for a few years. And moving from Chicago to Southern California was a new learning experience for me about what
Mm,
are the issues that are important to teachers and students and school communities. What are the ways that we experience identity? How do we use our voices? What are the questions that we're having? What are the ways we're languaging in the languages that we speak?
mhm,
I grew
mhm.
up as a monolingual English speaker in New York. I didn't grow up in a household where there were multiple languages. And for a lot of my career, while I was able to use, some of the Spanish I had learned and to teach in bilingual ways when I was in Massachusetts, it was an English only state. And so I had to, close the door and put down the curtains when I was using Spanish in the classroom or teaching
Mm,
bilingual poetry. And
mhm.
then when I got to Southern California, we have such an incredible array of languages in communities. Many of the districts that I work will have 80 or 90 languages spoken within the school community. And the programs that we run for newcomers and emergent plurilingual students, it's not uncommon to have 17 or 20 languages spoken just
Wow.
amongst the students in a particular site, 8 or 10 languages in a classroom. And so when we have such this richness of language available to us, when our students come in with so many stories and so many diverse experiences and trying to figure out how do we create a classroom discourse that represents all of us, that's
Mhm,
the
mhm.
question, right? Like, what do we do? What does that look like? And what can that be? When I'm working with pre-service teachers, they often say, but I don't know 8 or 10 different languages. Brave up and create radically inclusive classrooms that reflect the cultural and linguistic diversity, the identities, the priorities of our students. When we ourselves are just one person or just have one set of identities and experiences. And so that's really what we invite folks into in the book. We think of it as a professional conversation where we really explore how do we build community or comunidad, how do we establish a sense of confidence or confianza in our classrooms, and then how do we scaffold towards complexity? What does it look like for us to continually push towards more rigorous, more robust, more effective communication in all of the languages that we speak so that we're advancing students' academic experiences as well. It's not always about sort of touchy-feely, let's get to know each other activities, but really about how do we use the community that we create, how do we use our languaging to push students toward deeper rigor and more opportunities for engagement.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love so much of what you said there, in terms of making sure that students are included, but then also that level of rigor and the expectations that are there, and to help students reach those expectations is just so strong and so powerful, and not undermining someone because they're working through a second or a third language, and working with those strengths as well. So if I'm an educator out there listening right now, and I'm not familiar with the term plurilingual, how would you sort of sum up what that means?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's based on just what you said a moment ago, right? We often in schools apply deficit terminology to our students. We
Mm-hmm.
say things like, let's talk about our English learners. How are we going to accommodate our English learners? Where
Mm-hmm.
we're focusing on what students don't know or don't have. They don't yet have fluency in English. Instead of thinking about all the things that our students are bringing to the classroom, many of our students who are identified as ELs or English learners are actually learning and practicing their second, third, or fourth language. Some of the students we were working with this summer, English was a fifth language for them. And so when we're adding terms like English learners or presuming that students don't have academic experiences, they're not thinking in complex ways, they don't have prior knowledge about all of the topics we're talking about, we're really limiting both them and ourselves and the potentiality of what our classrooms can look like. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I think with teachers about is how can we shift our focus? We have to shift our language from English learner to emergent bilingual, we use often in California, or emergent multilingual to recognize students that are learning their third or fourth language. And my
Mm-hmm.
co-author, Fernando Rodríguez-Valls, and I use emergent plurilingual to really recognize that when we're touches it, or I'm thinking only in Spanish and my English is silenced, but rather all of my languages, my full linguistic repertoire exists inside my head all at the same time. And
Mm-hmm.
so that plurilingualism emphasizes just the linguistic diversity, not only of our heads, but also our classrooms. And given the number of students that we have in all of our classrooms who are multilingual themselves, in reality, there is no classroom that is English only. Here in
Mm-hmm.
California, 42% of public school students speak a language other than English at home. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, our classrooms continue to be overwhelmed by English monolingualism. With the exception of designated dual language programs, the overwhelming majority of science classrooms, social studies classrooms, math classrooms, language arts classrooms have books in English and languages in English, and every poster on the wall is in English. And
Mm-hmm.
that really undermines the opportunity of our multilingual students to use and leverage their full linguistic repertoire. But it also lets kids that were raised in English only monolingual households like me not develop and grow and stretch their own linguistic repertoires. So we're thinking about how can we change the linguistic ecology of our classrooms to
Mm-hmm.
represent just the tremendous linguistic resource that we have in front of us every time we walk into a classroom.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm a fan and advocate of writing instruction and sharing that message with students. With all of the tools that we have, we can compose across languages and between and among languages. And there's a beauty to that. And it may require me to do a little extra translating and a little bit of extra work, but that's okay at the end of the day too, because as you mentioned, it's about amplifying the voices of students, which I think is so important.
Right. We so often expect students to come into our classrooms and adapt to our way of doing things, and
Hmm.
we'll
Hmm.
accommodate them so that they can adapt. When in reality, our schools need to be adapting in response to the humans that are in them, right? And so,
Right.
as we think about what our work is, who does the heavy lift? It should be me in terms of
Hmm.
thinking about languaging so that I can create that space for my students to stretch and grow. I want the multilingual students that I'm working with to be able to talk about every idea we talk about in class in all of the languages that they speak. I want them
Hmm.
to be able to go home and talk to their parents and their grandparents and folks from their home country and their friends about the novel we're reading, or
Hmm.
about the way we're using numbers to represent important problems in the world, or about how we're making sense of civic processes or scientific concepts. There's so many opportunities in that, but it's hard. It can be hard work for me as an educator, right? And that's really where the subtitle of the book comes from, Braving Up. It was a teacher we were working with several years ago who was reflecting on her own students. And she said, these students, they're really braving up. And she said that, and I thought, oh, they are, but so are you. Look at the ways that you as an educator are being brave, and you're being vulnerable, and you're trying things that you're not really sure about, and you're
Hmm.
experimenting, and you're admitting what you don't know and co-constructing knowledge with students. Like that's the work in that. And it's so fun. Like, I think about, as an educator, when I have those moments with students where I really get to learn from them, where they let me see this window of life that I never would have had access to, that's what makes me want to go back to work the next day, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's not
Hmm.
because I had some standardized test that I have to administer, or there's some new policy, or because there's some other requirement that I'm doing. Instead, it's when I get to be with those stories. And
Hmm.
for anyone like you like to write with young people. I mean, it really is that, tell me your story. What is it? How can I create a space where you feel not only safe to share your story, but curious about your story and about the person next to you? And you're thinking about the nuanced ways that we convey that. How do we represent ourselves? What does it matter if I use one word or another? What's a concept that I might be able to express in one language, but not another language? And how does that make a difference?
Hmm.
One of the things we talk about a lot in the book are what we refer to as the three C's. So first, we need to establish a community or comunidad. Then we need to work on scaffolding confidence or confianza, because we're pushing towards complexity or complejidad. And every time we refer to those three concepts, we do so in both English and Spanish, both to reflect the linguistic diversity that I and my co-author bring to the project, but also because there are nuanced and important differences in what those concepts mean. So in English, when we talk about confidence, we talk about or think about sort of building ourselves up, feeling accomplished, feeling proud of ourselves. But in Spanish, when we use the word confianza, we conjure all of those things, building up oneself, that sense of one's own ability, but also trust. And the word itself, confianza, brings in both parts of that definition. We miss that in English when we just talk about confidence. And
Hmm.
so, every time we have a concept or an idea, we can really think about, what can I learn about this, by stretching my own linguistic repertoire or inviting others to the table.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned shifting the focus from deficit thinking, as well as braving up and being vulnerable, being willing to be the person in the room that might be learning something as well, because we're all learning all the time. Any other messages that you would share with educators as being particularly important to think about as they think through working with students who are plurilingual?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always tell teachers to do is, we asking students to do anything you're not willing to do yourself. So
Okay.
if you're asking your students to tell you who they are, you need to tell them who they are, who you are, right? If
Mhm.
you're
Mhm.
asking students to really think about, how does your identity and culture affect your interactions in this classroom, or affect the way you're reading this novel, or affect the way that you're talking about this particular idea, I, as a teacher, have to be willing to do that myself. And so a lot of the professional learning that I do with teachers, just this weekend, I was at a conference with K-6 teachers from all across Southern California, and we were looking at, how do we reveal ourselves? What's our own story, our own journey as cultural and linguistic beings? How did we learn about language? How did we learn what kinds of communication are welcomed and what kinds of communication we maybe should keep on the side or not use in
Mhm.
different parts of our lives? And
Mhm.
then how does that affect the work that we do in the classroom? So that sense or that willingness to engage in self-disclosure, to think about sharing our full journeys to share our own humanity with students is really important. Another thing that I often emphasize with teachers is that we have an awful lot of professional agency, right? We get to decide what the tone is in our classroom. We get to decide how we structure learning. We get to decide which texts we choose to center, which voices we choose to center, how we think about revision and publication of our students' work. And if we're not using that professional agency to disrupt monolingualism, to disrupt the silencing of student voices, all we're doing is acting as part of the problem, right? When we're policing students' language, when we're focusing on standardization or correctness rather than the expression of ideas,
Mhm.
or thinking about how to use our voices with purpose, or how to change our register based on our audience, if we're not being intentional and strategic about that, we're just telling students to fit that cookie cutter box. And
Mhm.
so I always think about, where can I reflect? What are the opportunities that I have in this moment? I mean, I don't need to tell you that we are in a moment nationally where teachers are thinking really carefully about everything we say and do in the
Oh,
classroom
absolutely.
on a
Mhm.
daily basis. And so this is a real opportunity for us to take that intentionality and that strategic thinking and to use it to advance our students' educational experiences, to encourage them and affirm them and say, school is for you. It's not for me. You're not here
Mhm.
to fill my job, but we're here to give you the springboard that you need and want for whatever steps come next.
I also love that because I know in places and at times teachers are discouraged at times certainly and overwhelmed. So that reminder about professional agency and the agency that we all carry is really important, I think.
Yeah. When we're feeling discouraged in that way, we can really take so much inspiration from our students. And so, one of the things that I really treasure about the book was the opportunity to amplify students' voices themselves. So, we include examples of students' plurilingual poetry in the book where they're writing in English and Pashtag and English and Spanish and thinking about, how do I use my voice and everything that I know and everything that I carry to say what I want from my educational experience. How do I talk about, there are several poems from newcomers, so students that have been in the US for less than a year, who are talking about, if I could change the world, what would I do?
Hmm.
And the opportunity to really read those poems and hear students' voices, but then also as educators to analyze them and say, these students are giving me my marching orders, right? They are telling me, like, we can get inspiration from their words, but I also have a chance to follow through on this request. Students
Hmm.
are asking me for something. How can I show up and deliver? Who are my colleagues as I do that? I think is so exciting and helps me gather the strength to deal with the next part of discouragement, right? Or whatever piece is in front of me that I'm struggling to make it through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So final question, and then we can hit anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to share, and that is resources for listeners, places that teachers can go to sort of learn more and explore this topic further. And of course, Braving Up is one of those spaces as well. I'll mention again.
Yes, absolutely. So we do have a website. It's bravingup.com. Teachers can go there. They can not only buy a copy of the book, but also we have a whole host of freely available professional learning resources for educators, videos about some of our work with newcomers and emergent plurilingual students, and lots of classroom ready examples of, here's how we can do identity artwork in classrooms. Here's how we can look at characterization. Here are examples of how we can build meaning across multiple languages. Lots of activities. I get to work with teachers all over, not only Southern California, but all over the country, and they share their resources with me. And so
Mhm.
learning about how in face-to-face classrooms and online classrooms, teachers are building multilingual word walls where they're expanding concepts and having students use memes to represent ideas and then languaging around it in multiple languages, or which videos they found most effective or helpful. All of those things we've assembled at bravingup.com. So that's certainly a resource for listeners who are interested in learning more. We also draw a tremendous amount of inspiration from the work of Ophelia Garcia around translanguage. She is the author of It Means to Adopt a Translanguaging Stance. And this is a stance where we think about students' whole linguistic repertoires as something that we not only embrace and affirm, but encourage and leverage in our classrooms. And so for anyone who wants to learn more about that work or about what it means to teach in linguistically expansive ways, I would certainly direct them towards looking at her work as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Alison Dover. Did we miss anything that you want to make sure to share?
I think we've covered it. I'm looking forward to hearing what listeners have to say about the book. Please, I always encourage folks to get in touch, reach out, show us examples of how you are braving up in your classroom. If you apply any of the pedagogies, if you have your students making language selfies or doing split image portraits or co-constructing plurilingual word walls or creating their language timelines, writing those poems, send them to us, share them. We love creating discourse across space and time and the opportunities that online engagement creates for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and glad to share about your work.
Thank you.